Howdy, howdy, howdy. Welcome to NycosRPG. I am Jonathan Albin, and this is the Game Master Soapbox. Today, we've got a lot of stuff to cover and the usual amount of time. So, as per usual, I'll be handling each of the subjects on the list here sequentially, and we'll take a short intermission between them to kind of reset at the next one so that we can stay on task and complete all the pieces. As usual, I'll go through the lineup. We're going to talk about what is role-playing really, what is the essence of role-play. We're going to look at a storyteller as a director or a manipulator, and this is in response to a post, and we'll go more into that. I also have the concept of flipping the script, and that is what is the Dungeon Master's role as being the person rolling dice within the session. Then, of course, my rant, and today's rant is on in-game player conflicts, and I'll go into the nuances of what those are and perhaps ways to avoid them. And then finally, kind of the biggest question of the current meta, if you will, is has live streaming game reached its termination? Are we seeing the end of live games online? And I believe me, my answer will probably surprise you. And then, of course, if we have time and responders, then of course we'll have a question and answer section at the end. Gotta move stuff around on my screen. Sorry for the inconvenience there. Alrighty, so if I ask the average person what is role playing, you get some raised eyebrows, you get some confusion, some odd responses from people. But the short answer to what role playing is it's playing. When we say that we are going to play, I guess I'm speaking historically, when we were kids and we would say, let's go play, the idea is you are going to go and involve yourself in a shared experience. If you're saying, well, we're going to go play football or baseball or some sport, those are pretty clearly defined by a set of rules, and everyone that is participating is aware of them. But really, playing is living in the imagination. It's engaging in the mental condition, the mental position, if you will, and not just the physical. And so if we are speaking of role-playing, we're taking on roles. And these can be as broadly defined as you might want. You can say that you're role-playing the President of the United States, or you're role-playing a situation in history, or you're role-playing interactions at a place of business. I mean, when I was a kid, I can remember role-playing with kids around the idea of we're workers in a community and we're going to go do our jobs and we're going to get our paychecks and we're going to do all the things that are involved in being that role. But role-playing, its origins as a role-playing game, and I suppose I need to be specific here. When you're speaking of a role-playing game, part of the game of it was the character creation and the discovery one would make by creating a character by a pure skeleton of statistics, and then sort of forcing yourself to imagine if you were that specific character. Now, I have to say this because when here's my grandpa day. Back in my day, when I was a youngster, the Dungeons and Dragons rules specified you rolled your character out in a specific order: strength, intelligence, wisdom, dex, con, and charisma. initially that list of attributes were determined to be in that order by the basis of priority. You would think that you need to be strong, you need to be intelligent, you need to be wise. Then you might need to be speedy, you might need to be tough, and you might need to be attractive, beautiful, or convincing. This order caused the character creation method for a person not involved or not understanding to be kind of a confusing series. And playing a character in a role-playing game was to look at the attributes as rolled, and then from that compare it with what the book said were the best races, classes, and what attributes would fit them the best, and then look at your series of numbers as rolled, and then decide what character would be best to be played with those numbers, and then sort of force yourself or drive yourself to be the person that those numbers defined. In other words, the very first character that I created, I don't remember much about that specific character. I remember his encounters because those are the encounters that I had, not the character, of course, but the numbers on the sheet I don't recall, but I do know that I had the maximum, or an 18, in dexterity, and that meant that my defining characteristic was speed and deftness of hand. And so given my, at 11, broad spectrum of reading materials, I had just happened to have read The Hobbit, and I'm not proud of it, but my very first character was named Bilbo Baggins, and you can't imagine what he was. In those days, when you built a character, if you took on the role of halfling, you were halfling. There was no specific difference that you had to determine for your class. You were all the same. You were a halfling. So that dexterity defined him, but it was literally looking at them, because when I was generating the character, when I was rolling the numbers, I was in my head going, oh, I can be a Conan. I can be a Conan. And then I rolled a lackluster strength. And I go, well, I could still be a Thulsa Doom. I could be a really powerful, Gandalf's Saruman, powerful wizard, not with that intelligence. Well, maybe I could be a great priest and, leader of a church or something, and I rolled a mediocre wisdom. And then finally my dex rolled, and then that led me to looking at the other numbers, especially with the lower strength, and says, oh, okay, I've got to be a halfling. I've got to fit that. And once you choose the role, then you're going to role play that one. And obviously, I'm talking myself right past my thresholds for this. So my role playing section is just to say that role playing is putting yourself out of your comfort zone. Instead of today's modern realm where you build a character the way you would want it to be played, and then you optimize your career advancement to be exactly what you want. To me, to my old ancient way of thinking, the concept of character creation today is actually an issue of wish fulfillment. It's just a different way of looking at fantasy. When I was younger, the idea was that you imagined yourself to be whatever role the numbers created, and nowadays it's you imagine if you got everything you ever wanted. You get to pursue the imagined world almost from a wish fulfillment aspect. And I think this is important when we're talking about role-playing games, is that if you are role-playing to build a character that's exactly what you want him to be, your wish fulfillment, then you need a system that accommodates your choices as a player. You need to optimize a system that doesn't depend on what die rolls you made in such an order. I've come to an understanding that even in Dungeons and Dragons, that the method of die rolling does only matter to the player if they are trying to be a wish fulfillment character compared to a randomly created character that they are going to role play. So just realizing that role playing has changed over the years has changed also my perception of the way players want to play and how they want to be rewarded. So we will go more into that at a later time, but obviously with only 10 minutes, that's really all I can cover is that role playing. What is role playing really today? Wish fulfillment. What was role playing when it, as it was defined, was investigation and exploration. All right. So the second section here comes from a comment, and I know I've had several friends who have done live streaming and video production, and one of the things they tell you always is to stay out of the comment section. Don't read them, don't respond to them, don't react to them. But given this Game Master Soapbox series is relatively new, I wanted to hit on this particular topic because it was literally the very first comment that I received. And I have to thank the individual who wrote it. I know if he's watching this, he's probably shocked that I would say thank you for that comment. But I want to say with appreciation how much I appreciate the amount of time that it took for you to actually decide to click on the comments box, type in your comment, and leave that for the world to see, because I think it will in the long term be reflected by others to be maybe not what you meant to say. But the question really was, when I spoke as a game master about manipulating the players and driving the players in the story direction, I created a situation where he accused, if you will, or made the accusation that I am, as a manipulator, the same as somebody who would be a gaslighter. And I don't know where this term gaslighter became famous. I know it had to be in a recent motion picture or something, but the concept of gaslighting or creating a false narrative in order to convince somebody to change their direction is not by any stretch what I envision being a director of a game is. And so when I use the term game master, I actually refer to it in the NycosRPG rule system as the story director, because the point being is that a director, you wouldn't fault, for example, a motion picture director for making a recommendation on how a player should be played within the story, wouldn't complain about the directors saying, well, maybe the scene should change this a little bit or whatever, and therefore guiding the story as the director chooses. I mean, that's the reason why there are director's cuts made of films, because the director doesn't always get the final word, and so a director's cut is their way. Well, I want to just clarify that the concept that I have of manipulating a person is not an adversarial or underhanded process, but rather it is an open and over-the-top explanation of how we're going to get from point A to point B to point C within the story. And when we think of it that way, when we think of a director as having a, granted, he's going to have a self-interest because he's one that's guiding the story, but in a larger sense, he's also being considerate of the players in the game to give them the maximum experience that he's trying to get to them. He takes upon him the obligation to guide them in some fashion to go from point A to point B to point C. And in what are classically known as railroad conditions, the storyteller simply says, this is the direction we're going, and these are the things we're going to engage, and this is the order, step A, step B, step C, to accomplish whatever that task is. Whereas I will go ahead and allege, I will suggest that a game master who is claiming a true sandbox world must either A, completely divorce themselves from direction and, as Hackmaster would say, let the die rolls where they may, let the die fall where they may, and just go with what the story, the random dice generation creates. Or they are also behind the scenes secretly directing, but they are doing so in a fashion that the players are not perceiving it as such. So, there I said it, either you are a absolute abject railroader and you are telling your players point A, point B, point C, or you are couching and disguising the decisions that you want to include in the game in a way that avoids that. And the difference in this case is that a director, somebody who is actually taking active position of being the teller of a story, is trying to guide the story in a direction, and therefore the direction, however subtle, is still guidance and is still a form of manipulation. So I do, as I said, appreciate the comment. I do need to clarify that in no fashion do I consider myself to be a gaslighter, because I'm not telling you how to run your game. I'm telling you how I run mine and giving you recommendations if you want to have a role play environment experience that's as been successful as my own. I mean, you don't. It's interesting if you've got 10,000 years of game time played, 10,000 years of character lifetimes in your arsenal, you will either have a billion characters who are disaffected and quit after a week, and therefore you've got an infinitely large number of players that don't give a rap, or you're going to have certain people throughout time that have embraced and carried on that framework into their own storytelling, or at least can recall individual stories from the game where there was a fondness. So, all right, I'm almost out of time on this section. I just realized that I wish to clarify that gaslighting is an offense. You should not try to force someone to believe something that is not true, or that can only be true if they accept your take on things. And of those persons who were note takers in my games, who were active gaslighters, they were attempting to subvert the story to meet their personal agenda. So that's what I was referring to. So there, I've said it. Now we'll move on. All right, so when you're going to run a game session and there are going to be random elements from which you expect die rolls to make the decisions, I guess you would say communal conviction would say that the player rolls their own dice. But inherently and intrinsically, the idea of an individual rolling dice for a random action denies them some of the experience of dealing with the success or failure. Because in the instant that they look at the die roll, they know the answer to the question. Did I succeed? Did I fail? Did I achieve the goal, or whatever? And so what I recommend is to think about, at least from time to time, and I do it maybe once or twice a year. Every once in a while, you as the storyteller are the only one rolling dice. The players tell you their suggestions, what they're going to do, what their die roll thresholds are, and then you roll the dice for them. Now, one way is to roll out in the open where the players can see the die rolls, but I've actually come to an understanding that the better way of storytelling, the more visceral way, is for you to roll the dice behind the screen so that the narrative is the only thing that they have to work with. In other words, they say, I'm going to attempt to ambush the scout. Well, okay, so you're making your stealth move. Right, roll the dice. Okay, so you made the stealth move. The guy you're following doesn't seem to have responded. What are you doing now? You're going to attempt to attack him. Okay, so go ahead and roll. Go ahead and as you're making your attack, are you attacking him as just a straight up backstab? Or are you trying to grab him? What's your idea? And then have them give that description. You roll the dice. Go. Okay, and then you resolve it for them through the narrative. They know whether they succeeded or failed. And yet it leaves an air of mystery about A, what happened, and B, what that die roll actually was. And there are reasons for this to be the case, because when you tell the story narratively, and the players react narratively except to explain which die roll threshold they have. You are allowing them to stay in that moment of that action throughout the process instead of forcing them to think of a mental gymnastics on what the die roll with its modifiers might be, and then resolving it. This is particularly the case when you are talking about a stealth check, a perception check, a discovery check, investigation check. These are all things that a person in the actual condition wouldn't know what the odds were of accomplishing the task, but only would know whether it succeeded or failed. And when you utilize a mechanism where you are doing the die rolling, it does leave you, if you will, in control of the game more clearly, but leaves the description to the players for what they are attempting to do, and it, if you will, argues better roleplay dialogue because you're actually getting information from them that feels like they're experiencing it. So I would recommend every once in a while do that and try flipping the script. I think you'll find that a game master who die rolls for his group will, at least in some cases, have a group that are more fascinated in the story and are more involved with what's going on than in a situation where they're allowed to randomly check a random die rolling mechanism and see whether or not their tune succeeded at whatever the action was. So, okay, that's actually shorter than I expected, but that's okay. We're going to go on to my rant for the week, and this one may be long, so it's probably good that we had to start it a little early. Today's rant comes to you from the tables of NycosRPG over the last 50 years and is rather dynamic. The idea of player conflict inside of a roleplay game. Now, I'm going to talk about this in three categories. So I'm going to keep my fingers up here so I remember what the three categories are. And wrong. Three. I've got to remember. ASL, this is 6. So 3. 3 forms of player conflict. The first one is player versus player not related to the game. There are times and places where individuals who are players of games sit down at the table with people that they generally have a beef with for some reason. The most egregious I can think of is I happen to remember a couple of young guys sitting at my table who were attempting to date the same young lady at the same time. And the amount of testosterone that they spread around on the table when they were, and I don't mean that in a visual way, so I'm sorry for giving you that horrible image, but the attempt to one-up each other was harming the storytelling and the game experience, and quite frankly, the unspoken conflict between them became louder than the action in the game, to the point where I literally had to have the players step outside and talk with both of them to get it resolved to the point where we could continue. Player v. player conflict that have nothing to do with the game has to be left at the door. And if the players cannot do so, if the players cannot isolate the distraction and get it away from the tabletop, you need to cease its play, because you're providing them a mechanism for avoidance of the actual issues between them. And so in-game player conflicts cannot be conflicts that are outside the table brought to the table. That's first. And that may be a hard and fast rule for me, but and other people may think that it's actually cathartic to let them, bash each other's brains out in a synthetic world instead of the real one. I don't think that it does so. I think it actually foments bad behavior on both parts, because it's subverting the actual conflict that is between them into something other, and therefore allowing them to not come to terms with the actual differences between them. Or it's a situation that can actually become untenable in the short order, and in that case, it actually breaking up that game session in particular because the other players were so disgusted with the two of them they didn't want to continue. So, in-gamer conflicts is a problem that way. The second way of my three, the second way that in-game conflicts are a problem is when one player or another determines that they feel that the other player's actions in-game are either untenable, irrational, or unwarranted. And this may be the biggest of the three, because an in-game conflict that arises because one player is being judgmental or critical of another player's condition is itself problematic, and is not only is it untenable, but it's also it allows for the potential for either improper or unethical in-game behavior, or a overt conflict that, because you are the game master and you're allowing it to happen, it grants the aggressor tacit approval. And as a game master, as a storyteller, you have to curtail that. If there is a situation where a player has an issue with something in the game, he has to bring that to the storyteller, has to bring that to the game master, because it's the game master that is, if you will, and maybe this is arguable, but it definitely is in control of the situation, and it's the storyteller's obligation to make things right. So the idea of in-player conflict, player versus player conflict that happened because one player is being disingenuous or cruel to another simply has to stop. And then the final third one, and I find this really fascinating, a lot of players, especially that are coming over from the video games marketplace, when they come to play, they want badly to do some ego measurement, if you will, by enacting player versus player conflict in the game. And this is never a good idea. As a matter of fact, one of my in-house rules is that there is no player versus player conflict or interaction, even to the point of you can't use magical effects to manipulate another player. You can't use mind control magics on each other. You can't force someone else to have to make a saving throw or anything like that. That all of that needs to happen from the storyteller outward. And so player versus player, now it doesn't seem like it'd be such a problem, right? Because they're both trying to resolve, which one's better or which one's got better skills, and maybe they just want to play out the mechanics. That's fine. If they wish to compete, there's no problem with putting them in a player versus environment comparative, letting them both try the same thing to see which one is, quote, better. But the player versus player conflict that arises from player or character versus character interaction is undermining of the storyline throughput. It actually, especially when you're talking about a conflict situation like role-play games where the overt loss of hit points leads to the end of a character, those kind of situations you don't want to leave for player-to-player conflict. So the biggest answer to the big question of in-game player in-game player conflict is that you can't let it happen. You have to find ways to prevent all the forms. Player versus player outside the game needs to be handled at the door before the game starts. Player versus player conflict when the player is complaining about another player's game style has to be stopped dead in its tracks and addressed so that the group can continue. And then ultimately, player versus player die rolling competition should be avoided because it doesn't provide any meaningful advancement of the characters and only contributes to disharmony among the players in the group. So stop it. My rant is don't bring your in-game conflicts to my table. And when it happens, I'm going to try to curtail it as quickly as I can. And it's for your own good. It's for our group's good. It is for the game's good that I do so. Alrighty, so the next section we're going to talk about is, has live stream gaming died? And I'm stating this not from the standpoint of an absolute, nor am I making a prognostication. I am asking the question simply because it seems to me, from my experience, is that there are thousands of channels right here on Twitch where a game master is sitting at a table with his players and expressing a story to them, and the viewer is hopefully following along and aware of what's going on in the story. And then the interaction between the players is so dynamic that the viewing of it starts to draw appeal, and more people therefore start to follow, and watch that show. And speaking of which, by the way, Games Master Soapbox is on every night at 11 p.m. If you like what you're seeing, make sure you like and follow the show on Twitch, and also watch for the YouTube, the shows to be on YouTube as well. And if you don't like what the show is, thank you for watching nonetheless, and I appreciate your time having spent it watching with us. If you would like to know more, of course, we have a Patreon account at patreon.com/Nykos, where you can actually become part of the environment, join and become a citizen of the world of Nykos, and actually be able to jump online with me and be part of this whole process. All right, so anyway, the reason why I wonder about live stream gaming dying is that the big boys on the block are still the big boys on the block. We haven't seen a qualitative, comparative product come out beyond the big ones that everyone's familiar with. Of course, I'm speaking of Matt Mercer's Critical Role and Adventure Time and a couple of others. But the idea is that we as role players are inclusive rather than exclusive. So I wonder at the role-playing mechanism, and if we have gotten to the point where live stream gaming is literally performance art, and we have an expectation that we are going to be flamboyant, we're going to be visually stimulating, that we're going to be maybe even politically controversial. If that is what we have to do to build the marketplace, I wonder if that's really what game masters or what role-play gamers want from their experience. And so this is also when I want to mention a bit about the NycosRPG open games experiments on Saturday mornings. Now, I only started this process a few weeks ago, and we've literally only had one episode, so I'm not using that as a critical frame of reference by any stretch. You can actually see the video. It's up on the Twitch channel still. But the concept is, I wonder, and I hope I'm right about this, I wonder how many people that are in the viewing audience would be role players if the opportunity was afforded them to be a part of the story. And so the Nykos Open RPG experiment is just that. If you jump on the channel and watch the stream and want to interact by putting comments in the comments box, then you can actually become a part of the story yourself. And as a storyteller with as many years of experience as I have, I can accommodate between 6 and 20 players on an ongoing basis, week over week, and I would love to have even half that number on a regular basis who are viewers who are contributing to the show simply through text. If, on the other hand, you want to be involved at a further level, that same experiment will be open to you as a online player, if you will, by joining the Patreon program at the $20 value, and then by that gain access to the Discord channel, and then you can actually be in a Discord verbal chat room with me while we're playing, and therefore expressing verbally what your character would be doing. So those of you that have never played in an online role-play game, it's a great way to do that. The concept of doing it through the written form is somewhat antiquated. I've got several friends who run play-by-post role-play games, and this would be no different than that, except it would be live responses to the inputs by the characters. So definitely, if you want to be a part of that, go to NycosRPG website on NycosRPG.com or to patreon.com/Nykos for more information on the process and how to be involved. Or you can watch the Game Master Soapbox videos in particular that have included information on the NycosRPG. If you have experience in role-playing games but want to know more about the NycosRPG mechanism, there's a video out currently available on how to build a character for the game, how to become involved that way, and I will be beginning new videos coming up in the future that will be Game Master tools, and will actually take many of the snippets from the Game Master Soapbox and made into full episodes. So, alrighty, now this we got into the question and answer section. At this point, I don't have any viewers online with me, and so therefore I'm going to go ahead and sign off for the night. And this video will be available on Twitch for about 2 weeks, and then it'll also be available on YouTube in the next few days. So if you have any questions, make sure you leave a message down below. Again, if you like the show and want to be a part of it, go ahead and click the follow button and click the bell on the YouTube page to make sure you don't miss any new updates that we do. Thank you very much for your participation, and I'll see you next time. Bye.